What are rock logic and water logic? Now, this is a really interesting thing. Most of our thinking that we've been educated to do in our culture is what could be described as rock logic. And rock logic comes from what Edward de Bono called the Gang of Three from ancient Greece. That was Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, who kind of invented this way of thinking, or not invented, but kind of codified this way of thinking that was very much about categories. So Aristotle was all about categories, like the whole breaking down nature into these different genus and species and all this kind of stuff. So something was either in a category or it wasn't. And if it was in one category, it wasn't in another category. And Edward de Bono has described this type of thinking as fascistic, which is quite a claim, but it's an interesting take on it because it's all about black and white, is not, binary, 0, 1. And there's not a lot of room for nuance or in between, or what he calls water logic, which is what I'll talk about now, is this flows towards that. Or in some situations, this behaves in this way, but in other situations, it behaves in a different way. So in this context, it's different. So this whole thing about contextual thinking and about flow is a completely different way of reasoning, really. And so much of our kind of political discourse is about, you've got woke versus what you ever called the opposite of the woke, the fascist, if you like, but then, the fascists are saying the wokes are fascistic. So it's like you got this collision, what they call the adversarial paradigm. Edward de Bono advocates a thing called parallel thinking, whereas we don't have to have this kind of like, here's an idea, and the aim is to kind of find what's wrong with it. Critical thinking is literally like criticizing, finding the error in an argument. Whereas parallel thinking is more about, we all look together in the same direction, we find the good, the not so good, and in doing that, we broaden our perspective, and we're not just limited to everything that was good in an alternative perspective being destroyed because there can only be one winner in this kind of rock logic world. It's like banging rocks together, one rock won, it was the better rock. So everything of value in the other point of view is thrown out, baby with the bathwater, that kind of thing. So I'm a big fan of water logic, which is recognizing contingency, recognizing that in some situations things can be true, in other situations they might not, that there might be a tendency for certain things to be a certain way, but in different circumstances they might be a different way. So this situation or this idea flows. How does it flow? What does it lead to if I follow that line of thought? And water can be amorphous. It can be in several categories. If you have like a grid on a map, the water can actually be all over that grid. It's not like just in one. And actually that's another good image for this rock versus water logic. If you get like a square meter of ground and you divide it into a grid, like a 3x3 grid, then you have some item, like some flower or some fungus or whatever it is. It's like, it's in grid A1 or it's in grid B3 or whatever. But actually, most of the time, it's going to be a little bit in one, it's going to be a little bit in the neighbouring one. And it's not actually true to say just that it's in grid A1. Well, it's not untrue, but it's incomplete to say that. So water logic would say, well, it's partially here, partially there. If we turn the grid 90 degrees or 45 degrees, or if we have a grid that has circles, it's like all about lenses, really. It's like rock logic has this kind of grid-like, cells. It's in this cell, it's not in that cell kind of logic to it. Whereas water logic, speaking of which, it started to rain, is much more fluid way of interpreting the world. And it encourages humility, right? In the way that we perceive the world. We don't say this is true, we say, this seems to be true, or this, in some situations this is true, but what you're saying might have some value. Let's kind of look at it together and see how our ideas kind of blend if we mix them. Water logic, again, like mixing two different fluids or whatever. So that's it, rock logic versus water logic in the way that we think and interpret our world. Okay, thanks for watching.